Yes, yeah, okay. Maybe we just start while I'm setting up the other camera. So thanks a lot, all of you, for joining us again. Thanks so much for sitting upstairs and discussing different options for ICT and not ICT and future mobility. I've, like all the rooms I've been to, I've seen very exciting discussions on topics that I even didn't think about before. So I think we have lots and lots of material to talk about. I don't want to use all the time for that. I just want to give our three panelists a quick chance to introduce themselves. So maybe we start with that. So Tina had her talk yesterday, so maybe you're not all aware of what she was talking about anymore. But for now, I think I would want to start with Aurélien, and maybe you can give us a bit of an 5 minutes intro to who you are and what your idea for future sustainable mobility could possibly be.
Yeah, I've talked just before the lunch, so just in a few words, maybe 3 key points of my presentation, of my vision of sustainable mobility. I think the first point is about the different externalities, different impacts or different challenges for sustainable mobility in terms of environmental impacts, social impacts, and also in terms of health impact. So mobility has to sustainable mobility has to deal with the important challenge of climate change, but there are also other kind of pollutions, other kinds of resources depletion, challenges for this sector, also in terms of public space consumption, in terms of physical inactivity, noise pollution, in terms of accidents also from mobility, or in terms of inequalities for the access of mobility within the population. So there are a lot of challenges, and in front of that, there are also different drivers, different possible solutions in order to decrease the environmental impact of mobility, and also to deal with the other externalities. So we talked about, I talked about the moderation of transport demand, about modal shifts, increasing vehicle occupancy, especially for cars, where there is an important potential with carpooling, with improving energy efficiency of the vehicles and decarbonizing the energy consumed. So the main message, I think, is that we really need to act with more ambition on all of these different drivers, and not only on technological ones, like it is the main focus, for example, for the French policies currently. And finally, for the role or the potentials of ICT in this transition, I think there are both opportunities and risks in terms of energy transition, and we really need to focus on the opportunities and try to limit, or even to not to go to certain technological developments related to ICT if there are not an important potential and an important positive potential of certain technologies in order to go towards more sustainable mobility. So a strong focus on opportunities as a help to energy transition and to the sustainable mobility, but it's not the miracle solution. So an important other parts of mobility need to evolve to tend towards more sustainable mobilities.
Thanks a lot, Aurélien. I would want to pass then on to Lieke. I think it fits quite well. So you set the targets. Lieke, how do we get there? How do we involve participants? How do we actually find out what people need and want in terms of mobility, and how do we stick it all together?
Yes, thank you, GT. Yeah, I talked this morning about user-centered design. My name is Lieke Ympa. I'm calling in from Berlin, where I have a UX consultancy. And I totally agree with Aurélien on, how we need to get people shift their modalities and, increase occupancy in the cars and get to more energy and efficiency. But my call this morning is really about, well, those solutions should be desirable in itself. So if we're going to build a new offer, then we want it to fit the user needs and to hunch them into a new kind of behavior. And the only way we can do that is get to know the users, because every user is different than I am, different than you are. So we need to develop that empathy for the user, because only then we can address his potential or uncovered needs, because often the user doesn't themselves know what the better future looks like.
Tina.
Yes, hello. I had some note here. Yeah, okay. So I originally studied urban engineering when I was doing my bachelor, and then I did a master in planning, like sustainable urban planning and design, but with a very strong planning focus rather than design. So that brought me into policy, and then I started to do more of like smart city planning, and that brought me into services and how to make use of ICT in a way that actually changes things. But I still kind of am very rooted in this idea that we, and I think maybe I share this, especially maybe with you, that it's like, we cannot solve things by only adding ICT and only adding services. We also need political and ambition and investments in the physical infrastructure as well. So I think that there is a potential for ICT to kind of complement and complete mobility in cities, but that it needs to be, that needs to follow other types of investments and different planning, and maybe a lot of use for ICT to change public opinion on certain topics. Yeah.
Okay, so I would kind of want to ask what those public opinions might be, but let's go into another direction first. So one of the key questions for the summer school was, what does degrowth mean in the context of ICT? I want to widen this up and say, what does degrowth mean for you in the context of mobility and ICT for mobility? So are we, when we talk about ICTs and future mobilities, are we mostly talking about optimizing things, or is there another paradigm that might lead us to build societies that are most self-sufficient? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Aurélien? You? Okay. There you go.
Yeah, I think that degrowth has. I am still not like 100%. I think degrowth sounds good. I still don't feel that I know enough about it to be like 100% on board. But I think that degrowth as a concept has immense potential for better mobility options and better transport systems, because how much should I go into depth on this? Well, not that much. What we know, for example, is that when people switch from using a car to using bicycles more, and maybe even to use public transport instead, like one of the things that they often enjoy is a slower pace of life and having more time for reflection and more time with their family and so on, which is also something that's connected to degrowth. If we have a if we work less, if we feel a lesser need for compensating for the depressing state of our overworked lives with consumption and distraction, we won't need to fly really far away several times, or need to, and like drive our kids with cars everywhere, like several times a week and so on, which gives a big potential for bicycling and walking and taking it easier.
Perspectives from my right side. Lieke has raised her finger. Maybe you start. Okay.
Go ahead, Aurélien.
Yeah, I think in terms of degrowth for mobility, it depends on which are the parameters for which parameters we want a degrowth. I think at least for carbon emissions, also for energy resources consumptions, and then we need to rethink more globally the transport system if we want at least a degrowth for these different parameters like resources and more globally the environmental impacts. So I think the more we act on sufficiency levers, the more we can deal with the different impacts and externalities at the same time, and the more we can reduce the energy consumptions and resources consumptions, and the more we act on technological drivers and levers, the less we can reduce these different impacts, and especially resources consumption. When we only focus on technology, especially electric cars, instead of thermal cars, the needs in terms of materials, in terms of resources, is the same or even more important for some of the materials compared to thermal cars. So we have to mobilize the different drivers at the same time if we want both to deal with the different impacts. Only focusing on technology is not sufficient if we want to also reduce the degrowth on different drivers of environmental and social impacts.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree to that. It is happening at different positions at the same time, and we need different initiatives that pushes toward the same goal. And I love, Tina, your the image you just painted of having a slower life. And I think mobility gives us opportunities and chances, and it expands the flexibilities of our minds, and we shouldn't have less chances, right, by traveling less. But we can also have chances around the corner of where we live. So from a planning perspective, of course, it has to happen in the 15-minute city as well as in ICT solutions. And if we then look only at ICT solutions, I think, we need to have a particular frugality, and this is not what we can get through optimizing things. We need to get rid of, especially in cities, we need to get rid of the car and the phone. Yes, because that sort of that honest life we won't get if we book all our things through our phone. So yeah, this is a future that I could imagine, you know, where sort of lightweight ICT solutions, and therefore not optimized, but just, you know, built from scratch, give us almost a no interaction, no technological interaction kind of mobility that still is super flexible and smart. You know, when do I want to go somewhere? When do I not want to go somewhere? The vehicles I'm using can then serve other people in other places. And for that, I mean, you know better than I do what kind of huge data network we need, and that data network needs to be different from what the GAFAs of this world show us.
But of course, at the moment, a lot of smart mobility initiatives focus on autonomous vehicles and things like that. So high-tech solutions that are driven by industry interests and kind of being promoted as something we need and we should desire. So in a future mobility, question A, on a scale from no mobility and no phone to what we have right now, what is sustainable? How do we define that? And B, who decides how much phone and how much mobility I get? I'm looking at Lieke because she's still smiling.
Yeah, but then it wasn't me, you know, counting all these the kinds of sustainabilities. I think it was Aurélien just in his introduction, you know, how we want to make use of the space and leave enough space for trees, and how we want to, you know, be social inclusive, and how we want to have less emissions. And so sustainability defines in a lot of directions.
Aurélien, want to get back on us? Or?
Yeah, I think is that as we need to focus more on sufficiency compared to today, we really need to focus more on the real needs of the population in terms of mobility, not only to try to give them some solutions, technological ones, or even different means of transportation, but really to try to understand what are the use, the different mobility usages, and to try to have some the most relevant mobility solutions, the most relevant transport modes, the most relevant technologies for each of these mobility uses, and not to try to give the same kind of solutions for all the population, but to adapt to local context, to social possibilities in terms of revenues, in terms of capabilities, in terms of mobility, and to really have different kind of solution, transport modes, vehicles, technologies for the different kind of usages of the mobility.
I think, you know, if we want to go to the super simple example, if we want to go to the office, we need to be mobile. If we don't go to the office, we have less of a pressure on the system. You're all in universities, you probably are allowed to work remotely. A big portion of the population is not allowed or cannot work remotely, but they would love to. But, you know, what are the practical things, the hurdles to overcome for the employers? They're sometimes very simple. They are just, you know, afraid that the IT system won't work, or, you know, in the tech system, they don't know how to financially help the the people at home with their internet connection, or, you know, there's just no trust in the self-responsibility of the people. So then you're going back to our school system. But, you know, I think in ICT, there is a task to educate people that take decisions, how and what systems are good and safe.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for my panel comrades. It's like, what do you think of as a need in terms of transport? Like, what is the transport that you actually need? Maybe
Us personally, or
no,
scale?
on a broader scale. Like, what is sufficient, and where do we draw the line for what needs to cater to, I guess?
It's a difficult question. I think the need is dependent on the context, as we have seen with the COVID crisis. Some needs of travel have changed because we had some constraints and reasons to change, and then the need to travel to the, for example, to go to work can be met by different means of transportation, but also by mobility or non-mobility with telework or something like that. So I think the need is a notion that can change through time, and asking the question of sufficiency and what is sufficient can change the way we see what is really the need in terms of mobility, or in terms of interactions that we search by mobility, or in terms of adventure we search when we want to travel. So yes, I think it's something that is changing, and it's not the same definition for all the people, I think.
But maybe we shouldn't focus too much on office workers like us, but we should also consider that our potatoes and our carrots basically don't grow in offices that can be operated remotely, right?
Yeah, and also there's a lot of workers that cannot work from home. Like if you work as a nurse or in a restaurant, or in healthcare, or any care-based job, basically, you can't work from home most of the time. So,
and these people have been incentivized for decades to live somewhere else than where they work. Now, how do we clean that up? How do we re-incentivize people to live close to where they work and still allow a certain level of mobility for those who need it? And again, who decides what we need?
We had this initiative for 3 months to have a public transport ticket here in Berlin, in all of Germany, for the local transport system for only €9 for the entire month. And this also really co-shaped my idealistic view on mobility. Now, I guess some of you have the notion of the unconditional basic income. I don't want to go there, but I do believe in unconditional basic mobility. I do think we should have mobility for all, and there is a basic need in being mobile and pushing your brain and getting inspiration from being on the go and having chances. So that is the basic need for everyone. And then on top come things like, adventure and thrill. If you go on holiday, or if you enjoy your bike ride to work, or your car ride, which then definitely should be, we should put borders on that, and also comes sort of the stillness of travel. How you use the travel to take a minute between things, and comes sort of the control of travel, just the things that you must do, be in time for work, etc. So, but this all counts for individual travel still, and not for logistics, as you were just mentioning. And for logistics, it's a whole different topic.
Do we know how this worked out in Germany? I've only read a few news articles, but I don't know if there were like big effects on how heavily public transport has been used, since it only costs €9. I know that other countries, like for example Luxembourg, have public transport for free for 2 or 3 years already. Similar initiative exists in Spain. I'm wondering, do people then use it more? Do they use cars less at the same time? Is there something visible? I don't know any statistics on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the complete picture at the moment right now, but I do know that, especially also because it was the first sort of summer for a lot of people, it was the first summer without Corona, so it was a lot of Reiseaufkommen, travel moments on top of where we started. So that I do know.
Yeah, I have seen some graph on that showed that it increased a lot. But maybe I can put it in the Slack later, because I think I have saved it somewhere.
So did the mobility in general increase, or did the use of public transportation increase?
I think so that's the good question. I only saw for train travel specifically, but I didn't see any numbers on did car use go down or not. But what I do remember was that a lot of people took the train that didn't normally took the train, which I think is a good thing, because something that we do know also again about car use is that many people that use a car very regularly never have any incentive to figure out how to use public transport. So it becomes kind of like a self-fulfilling, it just feeds itself sort of. Yeah.
And what I love about it is that, the stories that come about, starting from people who never had them, who live in the bigger Berlin area and never had the money to travel to the city center, all the way to, people living on the countryside and saying, well, now I actually spoke to a lady, she has her own company. She said, okay, I leave my Tesla at home. I usually take 45 minutes with a Tesla, and I try to do it on public transport because it just triggered her interest. And she did on public transport, took her 1.5 hours, so double the time. And so it was beautiful and terrible at the same time, right? And that's the state of public transport now. It's, for me, that's the huge inspiration to, go get it, make it better.
So in the context of transportation, we use a lot of ICT for monitoring activities, like how many passengers do you have on a train, air quality around roads, congestion in cities, all that kind of things. I'm wondering, so what's your thought? Is that a primary use case for ICT in future mobility as well? Can we maybe at some point just stop that and say maybe we don't need to monitor that much, because focusing on reducing impacts is way more important to monitor all the impacts, because we already know they're bad? How do we design these systems to be actually supporting sustainability initiatives, sustainability goals, although they might be bullshit, whatever you want to call them? That was a citation, actually, sustainability goals are bullshit.
So part of my work is you know, putting my efforts, even though sometimes they are unpaid, into making the change happen with the abilities that I have as designer/engineer. And at the moment, that's the state of the industry, right? If we want to create a new innovation in adaptive cruise controls for cars, then we probably can earn a lot of money. If we want to improve the bike to not slid on a snowy surface, you're probably a poor finance startup, even though you're in tech. Similarly, if you count cars, then there's probably 20 or so retainers in every city. If you count pedestrians, you know, people are not interested. So I do think there is a job to count, to collect the data of the modes that make sense.
Yeah, can I add to that? I think this connects to a point that I was making yesterday, but also about your talk, Aurélien. There's like we need to know what solutions really lead to. Like if we implement cheaper tickets for public transport, how does it actually implement, like how does it actually affect car traffic, for example, in that region or that country? If we implement like a new system where we clean the bicycle lanes twice as often, does it eventually change how many people that go by bicycle? Maybe it's difficult to 100% establish cause and effect when you do something out there in practice and practical life, and it might be influenced, of course, by other things as well. But then you have those statistics and you can use them to evaluate what was useful. And yeah.
Yeah, maybe just one point about previous question about the needs in terms of mobility. I think today we have very different needs in terms of mobility and very different mobility patterns in the population, and they are very diverse. But in front of that, we have mainly one tool which is used, which is the car. And this tool is quite similar between the different cars. Finally, there are like 5 seats. It's like more than 1 ton of materials. It's like the new cars in France can go until 180 kilometers per hour, which is a speed which is not useful in France, and even more, and even in the other countries in Europe. So we have one tool which is mainly over-dimensioned compared to the vast majority of the mobility patterns and the mobility trips of daily mobility. So it's an opportunity, as in France, the car represents like 2/3 of mobility in terms of number of trips, in terms of transport time, in terms of kilometers traveled. So this is the vast majority of our mobility. But as it is over-dimensioned, we have to develop different kind of solutions or different types of other means of transportations or other types of vehicles, as I showed before there are like intermediary vehicles between bike and cars, which can replace more easily the cars than classic bike for certain purpose. I think we have to have more diverse kind of solution for the diverse kind of mobility patterns that we have today.
Yeah, can I add to that? I agree, and I also think that there is a chance for sharing systems that are enabled or helped at least by ICT, probably, because it would be maybe unnecessary for each family to own one big car, one small car, two small like mopeds, and 6 bicycles. So it's better than if we can share them with our neighbors, for example. So we can have one big car shared between 3 families or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, as the car is used like a multi-tool for daily mobility, but also for long distance trips, which are not the same use with more people for long distance mobilities, for example. We need to have different kind of vehicles or transport modes. And then, yeah, I totally agree with the fact that we need to share more with different mobilities to be really efficient and not to multiply the different vehicles and transport modes if they are not well used through the year.
Lieke, I have an interesting one for you, because you started this discussion about certain solutions being easier to sell, to fund than many others, like counting cars or doing something for vehicular safety sells much more than, what was it, the non-slipping bike tires or something like that, right? So in your talk, you presented that solution with the street lights that flash green in the street and identify or point to a safe passage to cross a street for pedestrians. Who are the stakeholders that you would involve in designing such a system? Like who decides that this is to be built, how it's to be built, and who benefits from it?
Yeah, so it actually, we did involve the area of Berlin-Charlottenburg, from the political side, the city side, the decision takers, and so first of all, they were charmed by how in such a short time the designers can put really a positive image into the minds of people. And you could say they decide, but they only decide if they have an agreement of their voters, right? And on such a small area, so we were looking at 1 square really for this project. And there's so many people that just don't have that mindset yet of, okay, we need to try out things. We just build them, try them, learn, fail, and move on. And they are still stuck in particular mindsets. People that own a shop would go like, oh, I need parking spaces because otherwise my sales will go down. It's actually opposite. We know now by numbers, if there are no parking spaces, but a high quality of living on that street, so pedestrian areas, bicycle lanes, the sales will go up. But the mental model of the people is different. And now I think the role of ICT, apart from building that smart and lightweight solutions for the future, is, I think, showing solutions that make it happen today, and that can then sort of enlighten people, because seeing is believing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, my perspective would be that if you introduce something like that, you basically I mean, at the one hand, you're increasing road safety or safety of pedestrians at some part of the world. That's cool. But at the same time, you're building almost a super elitist system. Like you need to identify people, you need lots of electronics for that. And the people who suffer for that do not live in Berlin. They probably live in Africa or India. So how do we balance these things out against each other? I mean, I fully understand that there might be a need to try things out and find potential solution to help us in our problems that we have today. But are they the right problems and are they the right solutions? How do we, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. You know, on this particular design, the role of the design was to propose a positive possible future. And I totally agree with you. You know, it's not in line with what I said earlier. You know, we need sort of lightweight systems and frugality and you know, no cars and no phones, ideally. But this was really about seeing the possibilities.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can see that.
And I think, you know, people like here in the room are the people to say, you know, we can't build that. It doesn't make sense, as people suffer somewhere else in the world. And then come up with a better solution in the same line.
But I still agree that the system as you described it is probably a solution that can easily attract funding. So the interesting question for me then is still, how do we move away from that spiral where high-tech solutions, be it for mobility or for greener cities or whatsoever, are usually the ones that can easier be implemented because the funding is there. It will come from some company that is willing to develop that kind of solution. How can we move away from these funding incentivized things to long-term sustainability solutions that altogether have much less of an impact? How do we find ways of convincing people that less mobility or less phones, as you proposed it, may be viable and interesting and maybe even a preferable way to live than to have a smart, green, blinking LED lit passage over a busy road in Berlin?
Yeah, I think that is one of the big questions. Like we were talking about this earlier, about how maybe like one of the most, wait, did I already say this? Like maybe one of the most important, yes, I already said this. Maybe one of the most important roles for ICT is to change like a lot of attitudes and try to make public support for other politics or different things. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought while I was talking, but I had something smart to say before I started saying it. So
we believe so.
So I mean, that's a hard question, right? It's almost like a belief that degrowth will bring us away into the future. I was listening to a panel with Nick de la Forge from Planet A Ventures, and he was just, you know, putting everything in one bucket and saying decarbonize, decentralize, which I do agree on, and then he said digitize. You know, so how does that come together? Because, you know, this room knows that digitizing things also has a huge impact. But if it can help to decentralize and decarbonize, let's do it.
Yeah, so the question for me is more, is it all about decentralizing and decarbonizing, or is it more about a shift of power? power relationships in society as we have them today. And yeah, and then the question that comes from that is somehow, what would be the interesting solutions? What should we try out in the next year? Which governance and technological things should we as researchers or young PhD students, researchers, scientists invest in and put on our agendas? What should we write into our next research proposal as an interesting idea that could move us to a notion of sustainability that is more believable than what industry is trying to sell us?
I'm going to say something really terrible. What you should write into your next research proposal is how to flaunt with the newest technology. And about the notion of power, and this is why I come back to the Dutch queen on her bike going to an art exhibition. You know, definitely we need to convince people that it doesn't need, you know, this tons of material to protect their power. And so this is why I'm saying, you know, write into your research proposal how to flaunt with digital technology better than with lean digital technology better than with all this material, sort of flaunting or signaling as a service.
Sorry, can you clarify what you mean? I'm not 100% sure I understand.
It's like in the old days, you know, the bigger the car, the bigger the boss. And nowadays, it's probably if your Apple Watch lights up in purple because you have the Nike edition watch and you ran 500 kilometers with it, and that's the only way you can get purple highlights, then, you know, it's a way to flaunt, to show off with it. And I do think, because it's also, this is a good example because it's also activity. And it's enabled by technology. Just because I tracked all those, you know, 500 or 5,000 kilometers, you know, you can look it up. It's really true. You can only get that particular color. I don't know if it's purple though, but you can only get that particular color. If you.
Sorry, but do you mean that flaunting like an Apple Watch is better? Is it desirable? Is that your point? Sorry, this is a genuine question. It's not like it's a not rhetorical question. I really want to know. I can't tell.
It's hard to tell. I'd like to hear from you, but I think it's better to flaunt with that than to flaunt. I mean, it's a little bit better to flaunt with that than with. You know, it's not good to flaunt at all, probably, but it's better to flaunt with that than with a big car.
I mean, I would love, okay, yeah, maybe this sounds very, I don't know, far off, but I would love if you could flaunt with like having mended your shirt for 10 years. That's not a very digital solution, I guess.
I have a mechanical watch for way more than 10 years.
Yeah.
So just for the audience, I tried to summarize the discussions as I listened to them and as you wrote down questions. If I missed something, if there are questions that you want to still throw at us, then raise your hand and bring them. We still have a couple of minutes. So I think maybe quite an interesting idea to flaunting, how how did you call it? Flaunting technology, flaunting proposals, flaunting, what are we supposed to flaunt?
I think I said signaling as a service.
Service.
Signaling, yeah, signaling or showing off as a service.
What we are going to do in the summer school on Thursday and Friday is basically write fiction, fictional research proposals or fictional research paper abstracts. Maybe that's an interesting approach for you to think of a future or how you could imagine research in 50 years from now to answer big societal questions. And maybe that's an interesting connection from what we're discussing right now about, in a way, not knowing how to solve problems of governance and societal interactions around mobility and addressing it in a more fictional way in one of these approaches. Otherwise, are there questions from the audience that we should still cover now? Then maybe we do a final round with a closing statement from each of you. I don't know who wants to start, and then we close that panel because it's about time for coffee. Who wants to start? Aurélien, you have been very quiet, so I force you to say something now.
I don't know what to add, so if you have other messages.
Are you sure? Because I feel like
for the moment, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think I have said the things that I really wanted to say. I think we need to hold on tight to this kind of there's something called like avoid, shift, improve, but it's very similar to this strategy, but this idea that you shouldn't always go further unless you have to. And that I think that we will need all the tools that we have to change to a more sustainable society, including more sustainable mobility. And that will include like politics, money, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, probably different views on ownership or use of cars, probably maybe different ways of planning and living our lives and working. But I think we will need all of them, including digital technology.
Yeah, I still like I like a lot of the things that we discussed. I mean, obviously, flaunting is a bit of a sidetrack. I really like the notion of people who take decisions are human as well, and they have a particular perspective. And as we are here in the room, you know, all having a sort of a common grasp of degrowth and, you know, the good things about being on the road. We also have a common knowledge of, you know, being on the road, not with the car. So how is that for people who decide? Do they see? Do they feel? And can we help them see that? You know, either through showing them the data or to building a platform or to modeling the future. I like what Tina said about how we do experiments. And do they eventually change how we behave? Because it's going to be a gradual change because we have a crowd here that moves in a particular way. And, you know, can we have your technology to show the people that A, it's possible, and B, the impossible is already possible today, and B, show them how it really is, and get people who decide out of their mental models.
Would that be convincing? So like industry, be it vehicle industry, car industry, computing industry, whatsoever, they're convincing us with highly expensive advertising material that shows bigger and bigger cars driving faster and faster through green forests. And somehow that's a story we buy. Maybe it would be easier if we find marketing offices and not try and bring dry data and dry graphs and stories about how an alternative mobility is possible, but just go to a marketing office and basically follow the same story, pour a few billions in psychological research and marketing to have happy people cycle through green forests instead of using bigger and bigger vehicles.
You're asking me?
I don't know. Asking. I just realized that when I was walking through the rooms upstairs, while the groups were still thinking about which direction this panel should take, the question of governance and whether we should regulate how people move, or whether we shouldn't regulate it, and how should regulate, and how should decide what kind of technology and how many kilometers and whatever in that space is acceptable to be consumed by an individual or a region, was something that came up in every single of the 4 discussions, although the initial topic was a very different one. So it seems like this question of governance, who decides, who owns resources and infrastructure, is kind of the essential one. We have to quit. I have to leave you for your coffee break. I was just about to become the 4th panelist and get into rage here, but apparently that's not wanted by the organizers, and yeah. Please have a coffee. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for discussing and sharing your thoughts about mobility and sustainability and degrowth and whatsoever. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I also want to publicly apologize for absolutely slaughtering the pronunciation of both of my panel members' names. It was not on purpose. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.